I never thought something as mundane as working at Pizza Hut could change my life forever. I mean, who would, right? It's just a job, take orders, deliver pizzas, clean up the tables. That's it. But what happened to me one late night, what I witnessed in that seemingly ordinary store, turned my world upside down. It was around 11 p.m. when it started. Most of the customers were gone by then, and only a few stragglers were left, mostly those who had a few too many drinks and stumbled in for a late-night slice. I had just finished cleaning the kitchen and was wiping down the counters when I noticed something strange. A man walked into the restaurant. He was tall, probably in his late 30s, wearing a heavy black jacket despite the heat from the ovens. His face was partially covered with a cap, but I could still make out his pale skin and the strange, almost unnatural twitch in his left eye. Normally, I'd be polite, greet him, take his order, and get him his food. But that night, there was something about him that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, looking at the menu board. A few minutes passed, and I found myself wondering why he wasn't ordering. The silence was getting uncomfortable. Finally, he turned towards me and muttered something under his breath. I leaned in, thinking I hadn't heard him correctly. "What did you say?" I asked. The specials," he replied, his voice low, almost like he was trying to disguise it. I looked up at the board. "We've got a large pepperoni special tonight," I told him, forcing a smile. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he just stared at me, eyes wide, almost too wide, as if trying to look straight into me. I could feel my stomach knotting up. Then, in a voice I would never forget, he asked, "What happens when the pizza is too hot?" I didn't know how to respond. The question made no sense. "It's just pizza," I replied. "It's hot, and you wait for it to cool down." The man didn't seem to hear me. He started shaking his head slowly, and I swear I saw a faint smirk on his lips, but it wasn't a smile, it was something darker, something off. I should have asked him to leave then. But instead, I felt compelled to keep talking to him. "I'm sorry, can I get you something to drink while you wait?" I asked, trying to keep things normal, my voice wavering slightly. He didn't move. His eyes didn't leave me. "I'll just have a seat," he finally said. He didn't order anything. Just sat at the booth by the window. I watched him closely as I continued to clean up, but something in my gut told me that this wasn't just another weirdo customer. I wish I had left it at that. I wish I had just ignored him. But things only escalated from there. I went back to my usual duties, trying my best to ignore the man sitting in the booth. But I couldn't. Every few seconds, I'd glance over at him. He hadn't moved. Still sitting perfectly still, staring at the wall as if in some kind of trance. I told myself to stop being paranoid. Maybe he was just tired, maybe drunk, or maybe just a little off. People get weird at night. But as the minutes passed, I began to notice something strange. A sound, soft at first, like a faint tapping. At first, I thought it was just the flickering of the neon lights or the hum of the fridge in the back. But no, it was coming from the booth. The man wasn't tapping anything. Yet the noise persisted, rhythmic, like someone knocking on the walls behind him. I froze, holding my breath. The kitchen staff were busy in the back, and the other two workers were cleaning the restrooms. It was just me and the man in the front, alone in the building. I walked toward the booth, trying to seem casual, but my pulse was racing. As I got closer, the tapping grew louder, and that's when I saw it, a shadow. A long, stretching shadow, not moving, but growing. It seemed to come from behind the man, from the space between the booth and the wall. I couldn't explain it. Shadows don't grow in the middle of a brightly lit room. I stopped right behind the booth, my feet planted to the floor. The man didn't notice me. He was still staring at the wall, his body tense. The shadow seemed to pulsate as if it had a life of its own, crawling along the walls, stretching toward me. I took a step back, my heart pounding. What the hell was going on? Then the man moved, but not in a way a normal person should. His head turned slowly, too slowly, and when his eyes met mine, I felt like I was falling into them, like they were pulling me into some dark place I didn't want to go. He didn't speak, but his lips curled into that unsettling smirk again. I swear, it looked like he knew something I didn't, something that wasn't meant for me to know. And then I heard it. A whisper, like someone talking right in my ear. "Don't let it touch you." The words chilled me to my core. I didn't move, didn't speak. I just stood there, my legs frozen in place. The shadow, now creeping across the floor, was closer, almost reaching my feet. In that moment, I had no idea what to do. Should I scream? Should I run? but my feet wouldn't budge. I could feel the coldness from the shadow against my skin, and I could almost feel something crawling up my leg, something wrong. That's when I heard the door. The jingle of the bell above the entrance. Someone else had come in. The man's expression faltered for a moment, and the shadow disappeared, vanishing back into the walls as if it had never been there. I blinked, unsure of what I had just seen. But there was no time to process it. I had to snap out of it. "Can I help you?" I asked the new customer who walked in, my voice shaky. The man didn't answer. He simply stared at me, his face covered by a hood, his eyes too familiar. For the first time, I realized I wasn't alone. And whatever had been in the walls was watching me. The new customer didn't say a word. His presence was unsettling, but what truly threw me off was the way he was looking at me. His eyes were wide, and there was something about them, something that felt cold, calculating. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling and forced myself to take a breath. "Can I help you?" I repeated, trying to sound normal. I could feel the sweat starting to bead on my forehead. The man didn't respond immediately. He simply stepped forward, his movement smooth, almost too smooth. I took a step back instinctively. He didn't look like any other customer I'd seen before. There was something unnatural in the way he moved, and his silence was deafening. I could feel my pulse quickening, and for a split second I was convinced I was about to faint. But I had to keep it together. I had to be professional. Then, out of nowhere, the man spoke in a low, raspy voice. "I'll take a pizza. Pepperoni." I nodded quickly, trying to keep my hands from shaking as I entered the order. But my mind was racing. The way he spoke, it didn't match his appearance. His voice was hoarse, almost like it was being forced out, like he wasn't supposed to be there. As I finished putting in the order, I glanced over to the booth where the other man was sitting. He was still there, unmoving, his head slightly tilted as if he were studying me. But then something strange happened. His expression shifted. A flicker of something almost like amusement crossed his face, but it was gone in an instant. I quickly turned my attention back to the new customer. He was standing unnaturally still now, staring at the counter, his hands folded in front of him. I could see a faint shadow creeping along the edges of his figure, stretching, curling as if trying to reach something. The temperature in the restaurant seemed to drop, and I felt a chill running up my spine. It was as if the air itself had thickened, becoming heavier, suffocating. "Your pizza will be ready soon," I managed to say, forcing my voice to sound normal. "Just have a seat." The man didn't acknowledge me. He simply moved to a booth at the far side of the room, just out of view. But I could feel his presence, like something lurking in the corner of my eye. I tried to push all of it out of my mind. Maybe it was just my nerves. I hadn't gotten much sleep the night before, and working late was starting to get to me. But that shadow, the one that seemed to stretch from the walls, was still lingering in my thoughts. Minutes passed, and I kept busy with the pizza orders. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. There was a low, almost inaudible hum in the air, like the restaurant itself was vibrating. Suddenly, the door swung open again, and in walked a group of young people, chatting and laughing. I felt a brief sense of relief. More customers meant more distractions from whatever was happening around me. But as I turned to greet them, I saw the man in the booth. The one with the strange, unsettling gaze. He was gone. I froze. I hadn't heard him leave. There had been no sound, no jingle of the door. He had simply vanished. But when I looked over at the window, my heart stopped. There, standing outside in the parking lot, was the same man. The tall one, the one with the twitching eye. But this time he wasn't alone. Behind him stood another figure. And another. The shadows had returned, but this time they weren't confined to the walls. They were moving, shifting, forming shapes in the dark. I couldn't look away. The air was thick with a tension I couldn't describe, like something was about to snap. I didn't know what to do. Should I call the police? Should I run? But before I could decide, the door jangled open again. This time it wasn't another customer. It was the man in the black jacket, and he was walking straight toward me. And behind him, those shadows, they followed. I didn't move. I couldn't. The man in the black jacket was walking straight toward me, but it wasn't him that I was focused on. It was the shadows, those long, twisting figures that seemed to follow him like extensions of his very being. They slithered and coiled almost like they were alive, pulsating with an unnatural rhythm. It was as if the darkness itself was drawn to him. He stopped right in front of me. The smell of something rotten, like old meat, hit me. It was so strong, I nearly gagged. But I didn't dare show it. I couldn't. Not with him standing there, staring me down. His eyes were fixed on me, and once again, that smirk appeared on his lips. It wasn't a friendly smirk. It was something worse, something predatory. His lips parted, revealing yellow, decayed teeth. "Still here?" he rasped, his voice like gravel grinding underfoot. I couldn't answer. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to get away from him. But my body was frozen. Every instinct screamed at me to move, but I was trapped. Trapped by those eyes, trapped by the feeling that if I left, something terrible would happen. "Why don't you come closer?" he whispered, his voice like a low chant. His breath smelled worse now, like the air had thickened with the weight of it. Suddenly, the ground beneath my feet seemed to shift. The room spun. The shadows seemed to creep up the walls, drawing closer, enclosing me in a thick darkness. My vision blurred and I felt my legs give way beneath me. I had to catch myself on the counter, gasping for air as if I hadn't been able to breathe in ages. But then I heard it. A soft, raspy laugh. It wasn't coming from him, but from somewhere behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. Just the empty booths, the flickering lights above me, and the quiet hum of the ovens. But it was impossible to ignore. The laugh had been real. Someone or something was in the restaurant with me. And the shadows. They were moving. I turned back to face the man. But this time he wasn't alone. There were other figures in the room now, shadows, silhouettes, watching me. There was one near the back wall, another by the door, and another standing just behind the man. They were all looking at me, waiting. "You've seen too much," he said suddenly, his voice cold, devoid of emotion. "And now you have to pay the price." I didn't understand. Pay the price for what? For witnessing this? For feeling the darkness creep closer? The room seemed to close in on me, suffocating me with the weight of its silence. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up, every inch of my body screaming at me to run. But when I tried to move, I couldn't. My feet were glued to the floor as if invisible hands were holding me in place. And then, from the corner of the room, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A door. It hadn't been there before. At least, I didn't think it had. But now, it was standing open. A door leading into complete blackness. There was no light coming from it. No sound. It was just an empty, endless void. "Go ahead," the man said, his voice now laced with venom. "Walk through, but don't expect to come back." I didn't want to go anywhere near that door. I didn't want to even acknowledge its existence. But it felt like it was calling to me, pulling me toward it. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, but I couldn't move. I couldn't escape the trap I was in. Suddenly, there was a sharp sound. A door slamming shut behind me. I whipped around to find that the entrance to the restaurant, the door I knew had been wide open just moments ago, was now completely closed. No one was coming in. No one was going to help me. The man took a step toward me, his smile widening. "You were always meant to stay here." And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just a nightmare. It was real. The shadows weren't just part of the walls. They were real, and they had been watching me from the moment I stepped inside. The restaurant had become a prison, and I was its newest inhabitant. The air grew colder. I could see my breath as it escaped from my lips in a mist, and my heart raced in panic. The man in the black jacket was getting closer now, his footsteps silent but deliberate. I tried to back away, but my feet wouldn't move. The shadows around me seemed to close in, pressing against my skin, wrapping around me like a heavy blanket of dread. "You've been here before," the man said, his voice almost a whisper, but it felt like he was shouting inside my mind. "You just don't remember." I couldn't understand. My pulse was pounding in my ears, but I tried to focus. Had I been here before? Was I losing my mind? Was this some sick prank, or was there something else going on? I glanced around desperately, looking for any way to escape, but the windows were covered in a thick fog now, the streetlights outside dim and distorted. It felt like the world outside had disappeared, leaving me trapped in this dark, suffocating place. The restaurant was no longer familiar, everything had shifted. The tables were in different spots, and the ceiling lights flickered erratically. I tried to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. I was paralyzed. The man was right in front of me now, his face a mask of twisted glee, and I could feel the overwhelming weight of his presence closing in. "You didn't think this was just a job, did you?" he whispered, his voice laced with dark amusement. "Pizza Hut isn't a place. It's a door. A door to something far worse." I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. I wanted to run, to do anything, but the shadows had a hold on me now, and I felt as if they were pulling me down into the floor. The man leaned in, his cold breath brushing against my ear. "I'll show you what's behind the door. But you won't be able to leave, not unless you do something for me. You'll have to serve the final order." My mind was spinning. The final order? What was he talking about? I felt a wave of nausea rise in my chest, but I fought it back. I had to stay alert. I had to stay in control even if everything inside me was screaming to escape. Suddenly, the man's eyes darkened and his smile disappeared. The room seemed to tilt sideways, and I felt like I was falling into the void. I had to hold on. I had to stay conscious. The shadows were whispering now, their voices a cacophony of distant, hollow sounds. They were speaking to me, but I couldn't understand them. I didn't order anything, I stammered, the words slipping out as if I were trapped in a dream. My voice sounded distant, as if it weren't mine. The man's smirk returned, twisted and cruel. Oh, but you did. Everyone who comes here orders something. And what you've ordered, well, it's something you can never unsee. I was so dizzy now, my head spinning. I blinked rapidly, trying to clear the fog in my mind, but the more I fought it, the more the shadows around me seemed to grow. The air felt thicker, suffocating, and my chest tightened with the weight of it all. I could feel someone behind me. But when I turned around, there was nothing there. Only darkness, stretching further and further, swallowing the space around me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. And then I heard it. The sound of something cracking. Something breaking. A voice, deep and guttural, echoed through the walls, filling my mind with terror. It wasn't the man anymore. It was something else. Something ancient. You've been chosen. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I could feel the cold hands of whatever was lurking in the shadows reaching for me. They were close now. So close I could almost touch them. And then, in a voice I couldn't recognize as my own, I heard myself speak, the words coming unbidden from my mouth. I'll take the order. The man nodded, his twisted grin widening. Good. The room around me began to pulse like a heartbeat, and the shadows closed in, surrounding me from all sides. And then, everything went dark. The darkness wasn't like any kind of night I had ever known. It was absolute, suffocating, like I had been submerged in it, like I was drowning. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy, like the very air had become a prison. I tried to breathe, but the air tasted foul, thick with the taste of something decayed. My mind was racing, and I could feel a cold sweat dripping down my face, though I couldn't see anything, couldn't see my own hands in front of me. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the darkness lifted. I blinked against the harsh, blinding light, and for a moment I thought I was in a dream. But no, I could feel the cold metal beneath me, the rough texture of what I assumed was an old booth. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked around, my eyes adjusting to the strange, surreal scene before me. The restaurant was their Pizza Hut, but it wasn't the same. The familiar neon lights flickered above, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. The place was empty, save for a figure sitting in the far booth. The man in the black jacket. But he wasn't alone. Behind him stood more of those shadows, no longer just mere shapes, but things with limbs, twisted, contorted figures that seemed to move and shift with unnatural grace. They weren't human, not in the least. The more I looked, the more they seemed to be made of smoke and darkness, fingers reaching out from the walls, from the floor itself. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, glued to the booth where I was sitting. And that's when I realized my uniform was still on. I was still wearing the Pizza Hut shirt. I couldn't escape. The man looked at me from across the room, his pale face illuminated by the eerie glow of the flickering lights. His eyes, those damn eyes, were still wide, still twitching unnaturally in his sockets. He smiled, the same twisted grin, as though he had been waiting for this moment. "You're still here," he whispered, and his voice had a sharp, dissonant quality to it, like a song played out of tune. "Still serving the order." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, my words lost in the heavy air. The shadows seemed to close in on me, but this time I didn't feel the cold creeping up my legs. Instead, they surrounded the man. They clung to him, melting into his figure as if he was one with them, feeding off the darkness around him. "You see, the order's always the same," he continued, his voice growing louder, more distorted. "It never changes. We need someone to take the order. Someone to serve it." I felt something cold and wet brush against my skin, one of the shadows, or something worse. It was like a whisper against my flesh, and the sensation sent chills through my bones. "You were chosen, just like all the others," the man said, stepping closer now. "You didn't think you could escape, did you? The door was never meant for you." I felt a lump form in my throat. My heart raced. This couldn't be real. This had to be a nightmare. A bad dream I could wake up from. But the man's laughter, sharp and hollow, echoed through the room. "No one wakes up from here," he whispered, his face inches from mine. "You've stepped inside the order. And now there's only one way out." I wanted to ask what he meant, but my body wouldn't let me. I was frozen, as if I had been sealed inside this nightmare, trapped in the walls of the very place I had worked. And then it hit me, this was no longer just a restaurant. Pizza Hut had become something far darker. It was alive in a way I couldn't explain. The shadows were all around me now, crawling under my skin, in my mind. I could feel them, hear them whispering, twisting through my thoughts, consuming me. I was part of it now. Part of the order. I finally found my voice, though it was barely a whisper. How do I get out? The man's grin widened almost painfully so. You don't. You're the next one who serves. And you'll never leave this place again. The order needs you just like it needed all the others. And then, just as my heart dropped into my stomach, the door to the restaurant swung open once more. But it wasn't a customer. It was me. I was standing at the door, watching myself sitting in the booth, locked in place. My eyes were wide, filled with the same terror that had consumed me the moment I stepped inside. I realized with a horrifying clarity that I was trapped. I was going to serve the order for eternity. There was no escape. No one ever leaves Pizza Hut. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I stood there at the entrance, staring at myself in that booth, locked in place. My own eyes, wide with fear, were staring back at me, but there was no recognition. It wasn't me anymore. It couldn't be. I had become part of whatever this place was. The door behind me slammed shut with a deafening noise, trapping me inside. The man in the black jacket was standing now, his expression growing darker, more malevolent. His figure was no longer just a man. He had become something else, something monstrous, his form shifting between human and shadow, his features flickering like a dying light. You think you're special? He said, his voice hollow, lost in the thickening fog that had overtaken the room. You're not. You're just another cog in the machine. Another soul to serve the order. I stumbled backward, my eyes darting around the room. The shadows weren't just clinging to the walls anymore. They were on the ceiling, crawling across the floor, moving like they had a will of their own. I could feel their presence everywhere, suffocating me, pressing in from all sides. I turned to run, but my feet wouldn't move. It was as though the floor itself had become a trap, pulling me deeper into the ground. The restaurant had transformed. No longer a familiar place of neon lights and kitchen smells, it was now an endless void, the walls stretching far beyond what should be possible. The space seemed to go on forever, warped, disorienting. And then I saw it, the door. The one I had come in through. It was still there, but it was no longer the way out. It was the entrance to a new nightmare, a portal to something far worse. The shadows pulsed around it, writhing in anticipation. No, I whispered to myself. This isn't real. It can't be. But the man, the creature that he had become, laughed. It was the kind of laugh that echoed deep in your chest, a hollow sound that made my bones ache. This is real, he said, his voice fading in and out. This is the price. The price of silence. The price of serving the order. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't stand the suffocating, choking fear. I had to get out. But no matter how hard I tried, my feet wouldn't budge, my hands wouldn't move. The darkness around me grew thicker, and the man in the black jacket was stepping closer. Then something inside me snapped. The desperation, the fear pushed me to the breaking point. And with everything I had left, I lunged toward the door. I felt someone grabbing my arm, but I didn't stop. I slammed my shoulder into the door with all my might. And it opened. Just a crack. For a moment, I thought I had made it. That I was free. But then the shadows roared to life, a great tide of darkness crashing against me, pulling me back into the void. The door slammed shut with such force that I was thrown to the ground. And then, nothing. The world went black. Epilogue, the final customer. It's been years since that night. I don't know how I'm still here, how I'm still me. I've served countless orders, gone through the motions, but something's always off. The shadows never leave. They're always there, whispering, waiting for the next order to be placed. And sometimes, just sometimes, I hear a voice from the kitchen, soft, faint, like a whisper in the back of my mind. You're the next one. I don't know what that means. But I know that one day someone else will walk through the door. And when they do, they'll become part of the order too. Just like I did.